Colonel Aisha Langston sat bruised in a Jackson Hollow jail cell, her military ID crumpled like trash on the cold concrete. Officer Roland Hayes strutted out, his smirk wide, convinced he'd crushed another black soul who dared defy him. She'd been cuffed, humiliated, yet her eyes burned unbroken. In a voice low and steady, she called after him, "You've just lit a fuse you can't snuff out." His laugh echoed back. But what had he unleashed? Before we dive in, let me know where you're watching from, and if justice fires you up, hit like and subscribe because tomorrow's twist will leave you stunned. Aisha Langston gripped the steering wheel of her beat-up Ford pickup, the engine rumbling softly as she rolled through the dusty outskirts of Jackson Hollow, Mississippi, the late afternoon sun baking the cracked asphalt to a shimmering haze. She'd just left the youth center where she mentored kids, her gray tank top still damp from the humid air, her short-cropped hair tucked under a faded ball cap. Nothing about her screaming military colonel, just a 50-something black woman, trying to get home after a long day. The rearview mirror caught a glint, a sleek patrol car sliding into view, its waxed hood gleaming like a predator's teeth, and her stomach tightened, not out of fear, but instinct honed by decades of facing down worse than this. Officer Roland. Hayes sat behind the wheel, a burly figure with a buzzed head and a jaw clenched tight, his pale eyes locked on her truck, a man who'd built his 10-year career on making folks like her squirm. In Jackson Hollow, a town where Confederate flags still fluttered on porches and whispers of "Know Your Place" lingered in the air, Hayes was a legend, not for bravery, but for the way he'd park outside black-owned barbershops or soul food joints, sipping coffee, waiting for someone to flinch. He'd followed teenage boys on bikes for miles, pulled over grandmothers for suspicious grocery bags, always with that sneer curling his lips, a badge pinned to his chest like a medal for every complaint he'd dodged. Today, Aisha's tail light was his excuse, though it glowed steady and red. No flicker, no fault, just a lie he'd scribble into his report later, erratic vehicle operation, because truth didn't matter when Power wrote the story. The siren blipped once, sharp and commanding, and she eased the truck to the shoulder, gravel crunching under the tires, dust swirling up in thick clouds that stung her eyes as she blinked them clear. She adjusted her cap, checked her seatbelt, kept her hands at 10 and 2, every move deliberate, a ritual she'd taught to soldiers and kids alike. Stay calm, stay visible, stay alive. Hayes stepped out, boots thudding on the ground, his uniform crisp despite the 90-degree heat, a baton swinging lazily at his hip, his shadow stretching long and dark across the road as he sauntered up to her window. He tapped the glass with a knuckle, hard enough to rattle it, and she rolled it down, the creak of old mechanics loud in the silence, her face blank but her pulse steady, a soldier's discipline holding her firm. "License and registration," he barked, voice thick with that drawl that made every word sound like a threat, his eyes raking over her, not seeing a person, but a target, a chance to flex. Aisha reached slowly for the glove box, narrating softly, "Getting my papers, officer," and slid out her driver's license, her truck's title, and her military ID, the one with Colonel Aisha Langston, U.S. Army, retired, stamped in. Bold letters, a career of 22 years boiled down to a card he'd soon scoff at. He snatched them, barely glancing at the first two, but the military ID made his brow furrow, not with respect but suspicion, his lips twisting as he muttered, "Folks like you don't belong on my roads, playing dress-up with fake credentials." The racism hit like a slap, raw and unfiltered, his assumption that a black woman couldn't hold rank, couldn't be anything but a fraud, and Aisha's jaw tightened, not from surprise, but from the weight of hearing it again. The same bile. She'd faced in barracks and battlefields, now spat on a roadside in her own country. She pulled her phone from her pocket, thumbing the record button, the little red dot blinking as she set it on the dash, angled to catch his every move, a habit from years of training troops to document everything, to fight with proof when fists wouldn't do. "Sir, I'm recording this stop. May I ask the reason?" she said, voice level, professional. The kind of tone that had commanded platoons through chaos. But Hayes's sneer widened, his hand darting out to grab the phone, fingers crushing. The screen as he snarled, "No cameras on my watch, you don't get to play smart." The device cracked under his grip, glass splintering, and he tossed it into the dirt, stomping it once for good measure, the crunch of metal and plastic, sickening sound that echoed in her ears. Before she could protest, he yanked the door open, his meaty hand clamping her arm, wrenching her out onto the pavement, her cap tumbling off, her knees scraping the ground as he twisted her wrists behind her back. Cold steel clicked tight, handcuffs, biting into her skin, and he leaned close, breath hot with coffee and spite. "No evidence, no problem, huh, Colonel?" The word dripped with mockery, his laugh a guttural bark as he hauled her up, shoving her toward his car, her boots dragging in the dust, her shoulder aching from the force. A passing truck slowed, its driver craning his neck, but Hayes waved. Him off with a glare, a king on his turf, untouchable, or so he thought. Aisha stumbled, righted herself, her mind racing not with panic but calculation, every insult, every bruise catalogued in her head, a mental ledger she'd use later, because this wasn't just a stop, it was a declaration of war. Hayes slammed her into the patrol car's back seat, the door banging shut with a clang that rattled her bones, and as he climbed in front, adjusting his mirror to catch her reflection, she met his gaze, unblinking, her silence louder than any shout. He'd marked her as prey, another notch in his belt, but she'd seen worse monsters face them down in deserts half a world away, and survived. The engine roared to life, tires spitting gravel as he peeled out, the station 2 miles ahead, a concrete box where he'd parade his catch, oblivious to the storm he'd just kicked up. Aisha flexed her fingers against the cuffs, testing the give, her breath slow and even, a soldier's calm before the fight, because Hayes didn't know it yet, but he'd just lit the match on a powder keg 22 years in the making. She'd mentored kids that morning about standing tall, about turning pain into power, and now those lessons burned in her chest, a fire he couldn't douse with a badge or a baton. The road blurred past, cotton fields stretching wide under a sky turning orange, and she pictured the youth center, the faces of those teens, the promise she'd made to show them justice wasn't just a word. Hayes hummed to himself, some old tune about rebel flags and glory days, his knuckles white on the wheel, a man so drunk on control he couldn't see the cliff ahead. Aisha's lips twitched, not a smile but a spark. Because this stop, this moment, wasn't the end he thought it was. It was the beginning of his unraveling, a thread she'd pull until his whole rotten kingdom came apart. The station loomed. Closer, its floodlights cutting through the dusk, and she braced herself. Not for defeat, but for the next move, because Roland Hayes had no idea who he'd just cuffed, no clue that the woman in his back seat had spent a lifetime learning how. To break men like him, not with rage, but with the cold, sharp edge of truth. Aisha Langston stood rigid in the Jackson Hollow police station's booking room, her wrists still raw from the cuffs, the air thick with the stench of bleach and stale sweat, as fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, casting harsh shadows on the chipped linoleum floor. Officer Roland Hayes loomed nearby, his beefy frame blocking the exit, his sneer a jagged slash across his face as he barked at the desk clerk to process her quick, another troublemaker thinking she's special, his voice dripping with venom, every word a jab at her black skin, her quiet strength. She'd been hauled in minutes ago, her pickup left abandoned on that dusty road, her smashed phone a crumpled relic in his pocket. But Aisha kept her chin high, her hazel eyes locked on the rookie cop, fumbling with her paperwork, a skinny kid, with a mop of brown hair and a nervous twitch, clearly new to Hayes's game. "Name and occupation," he mumbled, barely audible, and Aisha spoke clear. "Colonel Aisha Langston, United States Army, retired," her tone clipped, authoritative, the kind that had silenced barracks full of grunts, and the rookie's head snapped up, his fingers pausing over the keyboard, a flicker of doubt creasing his brow. Hayes snorted, folding his arms. "Retired, my ass, probably stole that ID from some sucker." But the rookie squinted at the crumpled military card. It's Gold Eagle faded but legit, and his hands trembled as he typed, the room's hum growing louder in the silence. Aisha seized the moment, her voice steady as steel. "I demand my rights under Mississippi law, Article 3, Section 12, unlawful detention without cause." Reciting it like a drill sergeant, her 22 years of service sharpening. Every syllable, and the rookie flinched, glancing at Hayes, who rolled his eyes, muttering, "Lawyer now, huh?" But the kid wasn't buying it fully, not anymore. He hesitated, then reached for the cuff's key, his whisper barely a breath. "Sorry, Mum, this don't feel right." And the metal clicked free, her wrists springing loose, red marks blooming where steel had bitten flesh. Hayes lunged forward, his face purpling. "What the hell you doing, rookie?" But the kid stepped back, stammering, "She's got rank, sir. I checked the ID." And Aisha straightened, brushing dust off her tank top, her gaze boring into Hayes as he sputtered, his kingdom cracking just a hair. She walked out, legs steady despite the ache, the station's glass doors swinging shut behind her, the humid night air hitting her like a wave, and for a split second she thought she'd dodged his wrath, her boots crunching gravel as she headed for a payphone 3 blocks away, her mind already plotting to reclaim her truck, to fight this bully with the rules he ignored. Had she outsmarted him with a rookie's conscience? Could one small win unravel his reign? She exhaled, tasting freedom, but Jackson Hollow's quiet streets hid a darker pulse, a town where crosses once burned and Hayes ruled like a petty god. Hours later, she reached her clapboard house on Pine Street, a modest box with peeling blue paint, the porch light flickering as she fumbled her keys, exhaustion tugging at her bones, her bruised shoulder throbbing with every move. She stepped inside, the familiar creak of floorboards a comfort, and flipped on the kitchen light ready to collapse when a roar split the night, a blast so fierce it shook the walls, glass shattering inward as flames erupted outside, her pickup exploding in the driveway, a fireball swallowing the cab whole, metal twisting into a smoking skeleton. She dove to the floor, glass shards slicing her palms, her ears ringing, military instincts kicking in as she crawled to the window, peering through smoke to see the inferno licking the sky, her neighbors' silhouettes staggering out in robes, screams piercing the chaos. A scrap of paper fluttered down, singed but readable, landing near her bloody hands. "Stay in line, Colonel," scrawled in jagged ink, and her gut twisted, not from fear but fury, because this wasn't random. This was Hayes, his off-duty buddies wielding Molotov cocktails, their laughter echoing as tires squealed away into the dark. The truck, her lifeline, her freedom, gone in a blast meant to kill, and she clutched the note, her breath ragged, the heat searing her face through the broken pane, because Hayes hadn't just struck back, he'd declared open war, racial hate, fueling every flame, every shard of glass now a weapon in her mind. What kind of man burns a woman's world for daring to stand? How far would he go to keep his badge a crown? She staggered up, blood dripping onto the linoleum, her tank top soaked with sweat, and grabbed her old service pistol from a locked drawer. Its way to cold comfort, because this wasn't over. Not by a long shot. This was a battle she'd fought before, in deserts and debriefings, against men who saw her skin as a sin. The fire trucks wailed closer, red lights strobing through the haze, but Aisha's eyes burned hotter, fixed on that note, on the man who thought fire could silence her, because he'd misjudged her, underestimated the soldier who'd survived. Worse than his petty rage. Comment number 1 below if you think Hayes deserves to crash and burn for this. Hit like if Aisha's fight lights a fire in you, and subscribe because this story's just heating up. Trust me, you won't. See what's coming. Neighbors pounded on her door, voices frantic, "You okay in there?" But she barely heard, her mind racing, piecing together the next move, because Hayes's attack wasn't a win. It was a dare, and she'd answer it, not with screams, but strategy, the kind that topples tyrants. Could she turn this ashes into ammo? What happens when a colonel's pushed past breaking? Stick around because the fuse Hayes lit just caught and the explosion's nowhere near done. Aisha Langston stood in the cramped basement of Mount Zion Baptist Church, her hands still crusted with dried blood, the faint smell of smoke clinging to her tank top, as she faced a crowd of 50 Jackson Hollow residents, their faces a mix of anger and exhaustion, the room lit by a single bulb swinging from a frayed cord, casting jagged shadows on the cinder-block walls. It was dawn, 6 hours since her truck exploded, the fire trucks long gone, leaving her driveway a charred grave, and she'd walked here, barefoot through backyards, her pistol tucked in her waistband, every step fueled by the note still crumpled. In her pocket, "Stay in line, Colonel," a taunt she'd turn into a rallying cry. She held up her bruised arms, purple welts stark against her dark skin, and lifted the twisted tailgate from her pickup, its edges blackened, passing it to a wiry barber named Leon, his eyes narrowing as he gripped it, muttering, This ain't right, not one bit. The crowd murmured, heads nodding. Folks she'd known for years. A mechanic with grease-stained hands, a nurse in crumpled scrubs, a grandmother clutching a Bible, all fed up with Roland Hayes, the cop who'd terrorized their streets, their lives for a decade, his badge a license to stalk, to strike, to smirk when they dared complain. Aisha's voice cut through the hum, low but fierce. He thinks he can burn us out, break us down, because of who we are, what we look like, but I faced worse in Kabul and I'm still standing, so are you. She paced, her boots gone, socks torn, but her presence towered. A colonel commanding a new platoon, and they listened, rapt as she recounted the stop, the cuffs, the fire, every word stoking their fury. Because Hayes didn't just hit her. He hit them all every time he followed their sons, frisked their daughters, laughed at their pain. Leon slammed the tailgate on a table, splintering wood, shouting, "We've had enough, time to fight back." And the room erupted, fists pounding air, voices swearing to march, to speak, to end this reign of hate. And Aisha nodded, her chest tight with something like hope, because this was her army now, not soldiers but survivors. By noon, they spilled onto the church steps. A news van from WJXN rolling up, its antenna swaying in the humid breeze, a reporter with a mic thrusting it at Aisha as cameras whirred, capturing her scars, her story, her defiance. "Officer Roland, Hayes tried to kill me last night, because I'm black, because I wouldn't bow, but Jackson Hollow's done bowing." And the crowd roared, signs scrawled with "Justice Now" and "Hayes Must Pay" waving high, the broadcast beaming live. Across Mississippi, her words a match to dry grass, setting the town ablaze with outrage. She thought she'd won something, a crack in Hayes's armor, because by dusk the footage hit every TV in the county. His name a curse on lips from barrooms to beauty shops, his precinct phone ringing off the hook with demands he answer for. It and Aisha stood on her porch, watching neighbors hug, thinking maybe, just maybe, this was the tide turning, the power shifting. Her bruises a badge of victory. But Hayes wasn't pacing his precinct, stewing in shame. No, he sat in a dim garage across town, his buzzed head gleaming with sweat, his uniform swapped for a stained t-shirt, plotting with 3 off-duty pals, their faces ruddy from beer and spite. A table littered with empty cans and a police scanner crackling static. He'd seen the news, heard the chants, felt the heat, and his sneer twisted tighter. "She thinks she's got me, huh? Thinks a little TV time scares me." His voice a growl, his fingers snapping a matchstick in two, because humiliation didn't break him. It lit a fuse of its own, a rage rooted deep in the racism that fueled his every move, and he wasn't about to let a black woman, a colonel or not, take his throne. He leaned over a map, jabbing a spot near her house. "We hit her harder, make it stick," and his crew nodded, one pulling a baggie of cocaine from a lockbox, another grinning as he hefted a crowbar, because Hayes knew the game, knew how to twist the system he owned, and tonight he'd play it dirty. At 2 in the morning, Aisha slept fitfully on her couch, the pistol beside her, the windows boarded from the blast, when sirens wailed again, closer, louder, and her eyes snapped open, heart thudding as red and blue lights flooded her living room, shadows dancing wild on the walls. Boots pounded her porch, the door crashed inward, splintering off its hinges, and Hayes stormed in, badge gleaming, flanked by 2 deputies with drawn guns, their faces blank but eyes glinting with malice, and he held up a baggie, white powder, spilling as he shook it. "Found this in your kitchen, Colonel. Looks like you're a dealer now." His smirk a blade, cutting through her shock because she'd never seen that bag, never touched it, but he didn't care. This was his script. His revenge, racial hate dressed up as law. She bolted up, hands raised. "That's a lie, you planted it." But he laughed, a barking sound that chilled her spine, and the deputies grabbed her, one twisting her arm until it popped, the other slamming her face into the coffee table. Blood bursting from her nose, warm and coppery on her lips. As Hayes leaned close, whispering, "Protest all you want. Nobody's saving you now." They dragged her out, barefoot again, her tank top ripping at the shoulder, neighbors peering from curtains but too scared to move, and he shoved her into the patrol car, the same back seat as before, only now it stank of triumph. His triumph. Because the news didn't stop him, it pushed him to strike uglier, meaner, framing her for a felony that could lock her away for 20 years, a black woman turned criminal in a town that had believed it too quick. The car peeled out, her house shrinking in the dark, and Aisha's mind raced, not with despair but defiance, because Hayes thought this was checkmate, thought he'd buried her in his system. But she'd seen setups before, survived ambushes. Deadlier than this, and that crowd at the church. Those cameras, they were her lifeline, her proof if she could just hold on. Blood dripped onto her lap, her jaw throbbing but her eyes burned, locked on his reflection in the mirror. Because he doubled down, turned harassment into a frame job, and she'd triple down, turn his game into his grave. Because this wasn't over. It was war, and wars she knew how to win. Aisha Langston sat in the Jackson Hollow jail's holding cell, her nose crusted with dried blood, the taste of iron lingering on her split lip as she leaned against the damp concrete wall, the faint drip of a leaky pipe echoing in the stale air, her tank top torn and stiff with sweat, every breath a jab at her bruised ribs from Hayes's staged raid hours ago, that baggie of cocaine still flashing in her mind, a lie so bold it burned. The cell door clanged open, and Major Tyrone Brooks strode in, a broad-shouldered black man in his 40s, his civilian jacket barely hiding the soldier's posture, honed by 20 years in the army, his dark eyes flashing with fury as he saw her state. "They can't keep doing this, Aisha, not to you." His voice a low rumble, a friend from her Kabul days who'd faced mortar fire beside her, now here to pull her out of this pit. He'd driven 90 miles from Memphis the moment he heard, bailing her out with cash he'd scraped from his savings, $3,000 to spring her from Hayes's frame-up, and as they walked out, her bare feet slapping the linoleum, he gripped her shoulder. "We're ending this, legal and loud," because Tyrone knew the system's tricks, knew how racism twisted justice in towns like this, and he wasn't about to let her sink. By noon, they sat in a cramped office downtown, a lawyer named Carla Ruiz across the desk, a sharp-eyed woman with a stack of files and a pen that never stopped moving, her grey suit wrinkled from late nights, her voice crisp. "We've got the news footage, your bruises, the church rally, it's a start." And Aisha nodded, her jaw tight, handing over the singed note from the truck fire. "Stay in line, Colonel," a racist threat in Hayes's scrawl, every piece a brick in their case. Carla filed a lawsuit that afternoon, federal court, not local, alleging excessive force, false arrest, racial profiling, a 50-page beast that named Roland Hayes and the Jackson Hollow PD, backed by the WJXN broadcast, showing Aisha's defiance. Her scars, a public shaming Hayes couldn't dodge, and Tyrone grinned. "He's cooked, Colonel, cooked," because the evidence was tight, the outrage loud, and Aisha felt it, a lifeline snaking through the muck, a chance to bury him. 3 days later, they stood in a courtroom 40 miles north, Judge Ellis Hammond presiding, a rare breed with silver hair and a reputation for cutting through small-town corruption, his gavel a sharp crack as he skimmed the filings, his lined face unreadable, and Aisha sat ramrod straight, her borrowed blazer hiding the welts, Tyrone beside her, Carla pacing like a caged panther. Hayes slouched at the defense table, his uniform crisp, his buzzed head gleaming under the lights, his lawyer spouting officer safety and credible threat. But the judge wasn't biting, not when Carla played the news clip, Aisha's voice ringing out, "He tried to kill me because I'm black." The room's silence heavy as lead, and Hammond's eyes narrowed, locking on Hayes, who shifted, his sneer faltering for the first time. "Pending investigation, Officer Hayes is suspended without pay," the judge ruled, his voice a hammer. "Effective immediately," and Aisha exhaled, her fists unclenching, because this was it, a win, a real one. Hayes's badge stripped, his power clipped, the crowd outside cheering as word spread, a tide turning in Jackson Hollow, or so she thought, because justice felt close, her bruises a price worth paying if it meant his fall. She hugged Tyrone outside, the sun blazing down. "We got him," she whispered, and he laughed, "Damn right," but the air shifted, a chill creeping up her spine, because Hayes wasn't in cuffs, wasn't broken, he was free, plotting, and Jackson Hollow's shadows hid more than she knew. That night, Tyrone drove her to a motel 10 miles out, a safe spot to regroup, the neon sign buzzing vacancy as he parked his Jeep. "Get some rest, I'll handle security." His tone firm, a soldier's promise. But at 3 in the morning, tires screeched outside, a black van with no plates skidding to a halt, and 4 figures piled out, sheriff's deputies in plain clothes, Hayes's cronies, their faces masked but their intent clear. A payback crew fueled by the same hate that torched her truck, framed her with dope because suspension wasn't defeat. It was a spark to their fire. Tyrone heard the gravel crunch, grabbed his pistol. "Aisha, stay low." But the door exploded inward, wood splintering, and they swarmed him, bats swinging, one cracking his skull with a wet thud, another slamming his ribs until he crumpled, blood pooling on the carpet, his gun skittering useless under the bed. Aisha lunged, fists raised, but a boot caught her knee, dropping her, and a gravelly voice hissed, "Drop the case or you're next." The words, "a blade," a message from Hayes, because this wasn't random, this was racial war, his allies striking her lifeline, her brother in arms, to keep her down. They beat Tyrone into a coma, his pulse faint when they left, his face a mess of purple and red, and Aisha crawled to him sobbing, "Hold on, please," as sirens wailed distant, too late, because Hayes had doubled down again, turned a courtroom, a loss into a bloodbath, his network deep, his hate deeper, and she clutched Tyrone's hand, her victory ashes in her mouth, because this wasn't justice, it was a trap snapping shut. Motel staff found them at dawn, paramedics rushing Tyrone to ICU, tubes snaking from his chest, and Aisha stood outside, her borrowed blazer stained with his blood, her mind a storm, because Hayes wasn't just a cop, he was a hydra, every cut, sprouting new heads, and she'd underestimated his reach, his ruthlessness, the way racism wove through this town like roots under soil. Comment number 1 if you're raging at Hayes's dirty crew, hit like if Aisha's fight keeps you hooked, and subscribe because this war's exploding bigger than you think. She stared at the ICU doors, fists balled, because this wasn't the end, it was a call to fight smarter, harder. But what happens when a soldier's last ally falls? Can she claw back from this ambush, or is Hayes's next blow already loaded? Aisha Langston stood on the cracked steps of Jackson Hollow's City Hall, the midday sun scorching her bruised skin, her borrowed blazer swapped for a clean t-shirt scrounged from a motel lost and found, the fabric rough against the cuts on her arms as she faced a swelling crowd of 300, their voices a rising tide crashing against the squat brick building, its faded flag snapping in the muggy breeze, a symbol of a town rotting under men like Roland Hayes. Tyrone lay in a coma 40 miles away, tubes threading his chest, his blood still staining her memory, and that pain fueled her now, her voice hoarse but unyielding as she gripped a megaphone, its static crackling over the chants. Hayes burned my home, framed me, nearly killed my friend, all because I'm black and I wouldn't break. Each word a bullet, her hazel eyes sweeping the sea of faces, mechanics in oil-smeared overalls, teachers clutching signs, kids perched on parents' shoulders, all fed up with a cop who'd hunted them for years, his badge a noose tightening around their necks. She'd called this protest from a payphone at dawn, her hands trembling as she dialed Leon the barber, the nurse from the church meeting, every name she could recall, because Tyrone's beating wasn't just an attack, it was a gauntlet thrown. And Jackson Hollow answered, spilling into the streets with a fury Hayes couldn't ignore, their placards sharp with ink, "No more Hayes, end the hate," a wall of defiance under a sky thick with humidity, 98 degrees, and climbing. Aisha paced the steps, her socks frayed, her boots lost to the chaos, but her stance was iron, a colonel rallying troops. "We're not begging for justice, we're taking it," and the crowd roared, fists pumping, a sound that shook the windows. Because this wasn't just her fight now, it was theirs. Every stop, every slur, every unanswered complaint boiling over into this moment, and she felt it, a spark catching, a chance to bury Hayes under their collective weight. News vans circled, WJXN back with cameras rolling, a second station from Tupelo joining in, their lenses catching her bloodied nose, her unbowed spine, broadcasting live to thousands, and by 3 o'clock, the mayor, a sweaty man named Clarence Dobbs with a comb-over and a tie too tight, shuffled out, his hands raised. "We hear you, an investigation's coming," his voice tinny over a borrowed mic, and Aisha locked eyes with him, daring him to mean it. Because suspension wasn't enough, not after Tyrone, not after the cocaine lie, and the crowd cheered, a false dawn breaking, hope glinting like a mirage, because Hayes's name was mud now, his precinct a pariah, and she thought, maybe, just maybe, this was the lever to topple him for good. She hugged Leon on the steps, his calloused hand clapping her back. "You did it, Colonel." And she nodded, exhaustion warring with resolve, because the mayor's promise, the cameras, the chance, it felt like victory, a tide she could ride. But Jackson Hollow's underbelly churned darker than she knew. Across town, Hayes crouched in a rusted trailer off Highway 9. His uniform traded for a sweat-soaked flannel, his buzzed head glistening as he barked orders at 5 hired thugs, their faces scarred and grim, a crew of ex-cons and barroom brawlers. He'd pulled with cash from a slush fund, his suspension fueling not retreat but rage, his pale eyes glinting with a hate so deep it curdled the air. "That rallies her coffin. She don't get to win." His voice a snarl, his fist smashing a beer bottle, glass exploding across the floor, because Aisha's defiance, her black face on every screen, was a torch to his world, and he'd burn it all before letting her stand tall. He'd watched the news, seen the crowd, felt the noose of his own making tighten. But surrender wasn't in him, not when racism was his creed, and he handed out bats, bricks, a wad of bills. Make it chaos, pin it on her. Because a riot would flip the script, turn her army into a mob, her cause into a crime, and he'd walk free while she sank. At 5, as the rally peaked, the thugs struck, surging from alleys behind City Hall, their hoods pulled low, their weapons swinging wild, a bat cracking a teenager's arm, blood spraying the pavement, a brick shattering a grandmother's cheek, her scream piercing the chants as the crowd scattered, panic swallowing hope, bodies tumbling over curbs, signs snapping under boots. Aisha leapt from the steps, shoving kids behind her, her fists raised, but a thug slammed a pipe into her thigh, dropping her to her knees, pain searing white-hot as she gasped, and the cameras caught it all, the chaos, the blood, twisting her. Triumph into terror, because Hayes had planned it, paid for it, and now he watched from a rooftop 2 blocks away, binoculars pressed to his face, his sneer back, wider, uglier, because this was his game, racial hate, his ace. Sirens wailed, cops rushing in, not to help but to cuff, and Hayes's voice crackled over a burner phone. Arrest her. She started this. A lie so smooth it stuck, because his allies in the precinct obeyed, their batons swinging at the crowd, their hands yanking Aisha up, her leg limp, her t-shirt soaked with sweat and dust, blood trickling from a fresh gash on her brow as they dragged her to a van, the mayor shrinking back inside, his promise dust in the wind. She fought, elbows flying. "This is a setup, you know it." But the cuffs clicked tight, her wrists raw again, and the crowd's cheers turned to wails, because Hayes had turned their stand into a slaughter, 5 injured, 1 kid in critical, and pinned it on her. The black colonel who dared defy him, now a rioter in their eyes, a criminal in his story. The van lurched off, her head banging the wall, and she saw Leon tackled, his sign crushed, the news van spinning a new tale. Protest turns violent. Hayes's chaos drowning her truth, because he'd struck again, harder, deadlier, turning. Her rally into a graveyard, racial vengeance his weapon, and she spat blood on the floor, her mind racing, because this wasn't defeat, it was a dare, and she'd answer it, not with tears but tactics, because Hayes thought he'd won, thought he'd broken her, but he'd just sharpened her blade and she'd cut deeper next time. Thaisha Langston slumped on a metal bench in the Jackson Hollow jail's holding tank, her leg throbbing where the pipe had struck during the riot, her t-shirt stiff with dried blood and sweat, the gash on her brow pulsing as she pressed a filthy rag against it, the cell's air sour with mildew and despair, a flickering bulb overhead buzzing like a trapped wasp, her wrists chafed raw from the latest cuffs, the chaos of the rally still screaming in her head. 5 injured, a kid fighting. For life, all pinned on her by Roland Hayes's twisted game. She'd been locked up 3 hours, the precinct a hive of shouts and slamming doors, cops loyal to Hayes strutting past, their boots echoing on the concrete, one spitting through the bars. Riot starter, huh? Gonna rot for this. His grin, a slash of teeth, racial hate dripping from every word, because to them she wasn't a colonel, wasn't a person, just a black woman who dared too much. And now she paid. The mayor's promise a ghost, the crowd's hope crushed under Hayes's. Hired bats. She shifted, wincing, her mind racing despite the pain, because giving up wasn't in her, not after Kabul, not after Tyrone, and she scanned the cell, eyes sharp, soldier sharp, catching a janitor mopping near the bars, a wiry man in his 60s, with a grey beard and a limp, his overalls patched, his gaze flickering to her, quick, cautious, like he knew something. He shuffled closer, his mop sloshing water, and muttered low, "Saw what Hayes did planting that dope, got proof." His voice a rasp, barely audible over the precinct din, and Aisha's pulse kicked, her head tilting as he slipped a USB drive. Through the bars, small black scratched, dashcam his car night of the raid. Before he hobbled off, disappearing into the shadows, a ghost who'd just handed her gold. She palmed it, her fingers closing tight, because this was it, a lifeline. Hayes on tape framing her, and she slid it into her sock, the only hiding spot, her breath steadying as she plotted, because if she could get this out, it'd blow his lie wide open, turn his setup into her sword. A guard passed, a lanky kid with acne scars, and she flagged him, voice calm, "Need my phone call, State Law, Section 19. Citing it precise, her military edge cutting through his grunt, and he shrugged. Yeah, whatever. Unlocking. Her long enough to shove her to a payphone, its cord dangling, sticky with grime, and she dialed Leon, the barber, her voice urgent. "Got evidence, Hayes's dash cam. Pick it up now." Her words clipped, trusting him to move fast, because the church crew was all she had left. The guard yanked her back. Time's up, but she'd done it. The USB smuggled out when Leon arrived an hour later, slipping it to him through a handshake as he bailed her out. $500 from the rally fund, his eyes wide. "This? Real?" And she nodded. Real as his hate, because it was a ticket to flip the script. By noon they hit Carla's office, the lawyer's desk buried in papers, her coffee cold as she plugged the USB in, the screen flickering to life. Hayes's voice crackling through, "Toss that baggie in her sink, make it quick." The footage shaky but damning, his buzzed head bobbing as he planted the cocaine, his sneer caught clear, a racist setup in grainy color, and Carla whooped, "This is it. We've got him." Filing it with the court that day, a federal judge this time, not Hammond but a woman named Patel, her rulings known for steel. At 2 they stood in chambers, Aisha in borrowed jeans, her limp pronounced Carla playing the clip, Patel's eyes narrowing as Hayes's lawyer stammered, "Tampered evidence," but the judge wasn't buying. "Charges dropped, Ms. Langston." "Released," her gavel a thunderclap, and outside a crowd from the rally cheered, smaller now, 50 strong, their voices raw but alive. "Justice, justice," because Hayes was sinking, his frame-up exposed, and Aisha hugged Leon, her chest light, thinking this was the win, the real one, his badge a noose around his neck at last. She limped home, the sun dipping low, her house still boarded, but hope flickered, because the news hit WJXN again, Colonel cleared, cop caught. And she pictured Hayes sweating, his kingdom cracking, her pain a price for this moment, or so she believed, because night fell too quiet, too still. Hayes wasn't at the precinct, wasn't licking wounds. He sat in a backwoods shed, his flannel soaked, his crew around him, their faces hard, and he grinned. "She's free, huh? Not for long." His voice a blade because defeat didn't stop him. It sharpened him, racial hate his fuel, and he'd heard the ruling, seen the cheers, and decided she'd pay bigger, bloodier. He drove to the youth center that night, the one Aisha mentored at, a rickety hall where kids dreamed past Jackson Hollow's chains, and doused it with gasoline, his match flaring bright as he tossed it, flames roaring up the walls, swallowing. The roof screams erupting as a teen, Jamal 16 with a gap-toothed smile slept inside, his body trapped when the beams collapsed, his cries cut short, a life snuffed for Hayes's revenge. Cops found Aisha's military ID in the ashes, planted there, her name scrawled on a wall, murderer. And by dawn, sirens wailed to her door again, deputies kicking it down, guns drawn. "You're under arrest, arson and homicide." There. Voices cold. Hayes's trap snapping shut because he'd turned her victory to dust, a kid dead. Her name cursed, racial hate his hammer, and she stood, hands up, her eyes burning, because this wasn't just a blow, it was a massacre. And he'd pinned it on her, smirking from the shadows. Comment number 1 if you're gutted for Jamal. Hit like if Aisha's grit keeps you glued. And subscribe because this fight's spiraling wilder than ever. She stared at the deputies, her mind racing, because Hayes had gone nuclear. But what's a soldier do when the enemy burns everything she loves? Can she rise from this inferno? Or is his next strike already lit? Aisha Langston crouched in the back of a Jackson Hollow squad car, her wrists bleeding under tight cuffs, the stench of burnt rubber and gasoline clinging to her torn jeans as deputies roared her toward the precinct, her mind a storm of grief and rage. Jamal's death a fresh wound, his screams from the youth center fire echoing in her skull, her military ID planted in the ashes, Hayes's latest racial dagger twisting deep because he'd killed a kid, 16 years young, to bury. Her and now the town saw her as the monster, not him. The van hit a pothole, jarring her bruised leg, the gash on her brow dripping red onto her lap. And she flexed her fingers, testing the cuffs, her army training kicking in, slow breaths, sharp focus, because sitting still meant death, meant Hayes. Winning. And she'd survived worse ambushes in sandstorms, bullets whizzing past her helmet. So this wasn't the end, not yet. The deputies up front laughed, one muttering, "Arsonist bitch gonna fry for this." His voice thick with hate, the other nodding, Hayes's puppets through and through, and she spotted a chance, the passenger fumbling a cigarette, the driver's. Eyes off her and she moved, silent, swift, twisting her body to slip a bobby pin from her sock, a trick from survival school, working it into the cufflock, metal scraping metal until it clicked free, her wrists loose, her pulse pounding as she waited coiled ready. The van slowed at a red light, 2 miles from the station, and she lunged, slamming her elbow into the passenger's neck, a grunt escaping him as she kicked the cage divider, startling the driver, who swerved, cursing, "What the hell?" And she shoved the door, hinges weak from rust, popping it open, tumbling out onto asphalt, skin tearing as she rolled, tires squealing behind her, shouts erupting. But she was up, sprinting, her limp screaming pain, disappearing into a maze of alleys, trash cans clanging as she vaulted them, her breath ragged. A fugitive now, because Hayes's frame-up left no choice. Jail was a grave and she'd fight from the shadows. She ran 5 miles, lungs burning, ducking into a sagging barn off a dirt road, its roof half-caved, hay bales mouldy and damp, the night air thick with crickets and the faint wail of sirens fading, and she collapsed, tearing her t-shirt to wrap. Her leg, her hands shaking as she pieced a plan because running wasn't surrender. It was war, and she needed help, needed proof, needed to breathe. She remembered a journalist, Dana Price from WJXN, a wiry woman who'd filmed the rally, her card tucked in Aisha's memory, and she crawled to a creek, washing blood from her face, then hiked to a gas station 10 miles out, her socks shredded, feet blistered, using a payphone to call, "Dana, it's Aisha, I've got Hayes's dashcam, need you to air it, I'm innocent." Her voice a rasp, and Dana paused. "Where are you? I'll meet you." Her tone urgent, a lifeline, Aisha. Grabbed because the USB was out there. Leon had it, and if it hit the news, Hayes's arson lie might crack. Dana arrived at midnight, her sedan rattling up to the barn, her short hair glinting under a flashlight. "Got the drive from your barber. Let's do this." And Aisha climbed in, relief washing her, because the story aired at dawn. National Now, CNN picking it up. Colonel framed, cops crime exposed. The dashcam replaying Hayes's cocaine plant. Protests erupting coast to coast. Hashtags flooding screens. Justice for Aisha trending, and she watched from the barns. Loft, a stolen radio crackling the news. Her name a beacon. Hayes's a curse, feds circling Jackson Hollow. Her flight buying her this win. This breath because he was cornered, his allies peeling off, or so she thought because the barns. Quiet hid a snake. Dana paced below, her phone buzzing. "This is big, Aisha, you're a hero." But her eyes darted, her fingers texting fast, and Aisha missed it, exhaustion dulling her edge, because Dana wasn't just a journalist, she was Hayes's cousin. A secret buried deep, her scoop a mask for betrayal, and she'd leaked Aisha's spot, barn off Route 12 to Hayes's crew, her loyalty not to truth but blood, racial hate a family tie. At 3 a.m, engines growled close, headlights slicing the dark, and Aisha snapped awake, peering through a slat, 6 men piling out, hoods up, torches lit, their boots stomping as Dana slipped away, her sedan vanishing. A Judas kiss. Delivered. And Aisha's gut sank because this was no random hunt. This was Hayes, his reach clawing her even now, his suspension a spark to his fury, not his fall. The first torch hit the barn, flames licking dry wood, smoke choking her lungs as she scrambled, hay igniting, the roof groaning, and she leapt from the loft, landing hard, her leg buckling, skin blistering as fire roared, a lynch mob circling. Their shouts wild. Burn her out. Racial hate their hymn, and she crawled, coughing, through a back hatch, the barn collapsing behind her. The pyre meant to end her, but she rolled into a ditch, mud cool on her burns. Her eyes streaming because Hayes had turned her wind to ash again, Dana's stab a blade she hadn't seen, and she staggered up, half dead, her pistol lost, her hope charred but not gone, because this wasn't surrender. It was fuel, and she'd fight through hell itself. The mob roared, thinking her trapped, their torches waving, but she limped into the woods, thorns tearing her jeans, her mind racing, because Hayes wasn't just a cop, he was a plague. And Dana's betrayal, the fire, the manhunt, it was racial. War dialed to 11. A noose he'd tighten until she broke, but breaking wasn't her, surviving was, and she'd claw back, find a way, because Jamal's death, Tyrone's coma, her burned life, they demanded it, and Hayes would pay, even, if it took her last breath. Aisha Langston stumbled through the dense woods outside Jackson Hollow, her skin blistered from the barn fire, her jeans shredded by thorns, the acrid sting of smoke still clawing her throat as she limped on a leg, screaming with every step, her body a map of burns and bruises, but her mind razor-sharp, forged in the crucible of survival. Because Dana's betrayal, the lynch mob's torches, Hayes's unrelenting racial hate, they'd pushed her past breaking, into a place where surrender died and fight roared alive. Dawn broke grey and heavy, the Mississippi air thick with damp 90 degrees already, and she found a stream, splashing water on her scorched arms, her reflection a ghost, hollow-eyed but unbowed, because Jamal's death, Tyrone's coma, the youth center's ashes. They weren't weights, they were fuel, and she'd burn Hayes's world with them, not as a victim but a soldier, because 22 years in uniform taught her one truth: you don't wait for rescue, you strike back. Hard, fast, smart. She remembered the precinct, Hayes's hub, his lair, and knew it held more than cuffs. It held secrets, texts, files, proof of his rot, and she'd get it, because running wasn't enough. Exposing him fully was the blade to cut his throat. So she trekked back 10 miles through brush and back roads, her socks gone, feet raw, reaching town by dusk. The streets quiet, the manhunt spread thin, feds sniffing but not close. At midnight, she crouched behind a dumpster across from the station, its floodlights carving the night, a brick box humming with arrogance. And she watched, patient, predator quiet, as shifts changed, a lone guard smoking at the back door, his. Yawn her window because Hayes's crew thought her dead, thought the fire finished her. And that was their mistake, her edge. She moved, shadow silent, her army stealth kicking in, slipping a rock into her fist, cracking it against the guard's skull. A soft thud as he slumped, his keys jangling free. And she dragged him into bushes, her breath shallow, her burns pulsing. But no time for pain, because this was it, her shot. Inside, the precinct stank of coffee and neglect, a maze of desks and flickering screens, and she found Hayes's office, third door left, his nameplate scratched but proud, the lock child's play for her bobby pin trick, and she slipped in. The darker cloak, his computer glowing faint, a sleeping beast she'd wake. She hacked it, her fingers flying, muscle memory from Intel courses, cracking his password Rebel Pride 69, a racist joke that fit him, and files spilled open, texts to his crew, plant the ID, torch the center. She's done. A digital confession, his voice in every line, and she plugged in a USB from his drawer, copying it all, her heart hammering, because this was gold, better than the dash cam, a map of his hate, his crimes, racial venom in black and white. She yanked the drive, slipped out, the guard still out cold, and ran. 3 blocks to a library, its ancient PC coughing to life as she uploaded it all, anonymous, to every news site, every forum, Officer Hayes's orders, the subject line, T-bomb, and by dawn it hit. CNN screaming, cops texts expose murder plot, protests erupting nationwide, from Atlanta to Oakland, thousands marching, feds raiding Jackson Hollow, Hayes' allies scrambling, his name a plague, and Aisha, watched from a diner's TV, a stolen hoodie hiding her burns, her chest tight with something like triumph, because this was her strike, her win, his empire buckling. Or so she thought, because Hayes wasn't running, he was raging. He sat in a basement 10 miles out, his flannel ripped, his buzzed head, slick with fury, his crew dwindling but loyal, their eyes wild as he paced. She's a ghost, keeps coming, his snarl a beast's, because the texts, the news, the feds, they didn't break him. They lit him darker, racial hate his oxygen, and he'd hit her where it hurt most, not with fire, but family, because Aisha wasn't alone. She had roots, and he'd rip them out. He tracked her mother, Evelyn Langston, 72, a retired nurse living 20 miles north, frail but fierce, and that night he stormed her clapboard house, his boots splintering the door, his gun drawn. "Where's your bitch daughter?" His voice venom, and Evelyn spat, "You're the devil, boy." Her defiance a mirror of Aisha's, but he didn't flinch, tying her wrists. Her grey hair wild as he dragged her to a van, a live stream flickering on, his face masked but his intent clear. "Surrender, Colonel, or she dies." The feed blasting to millions, Evelyn's eyes wide, defiant, a noose around her neck, and Aisha saw it, the diner TV switching live, her coffee crashing to the floor, her scream silent, because Hayes had gone beyond murder, beyond arson, to this, a racial execution, her mother's life the price, and he laughed. Clocks ticking, because this was his counter, his checkmate. Hate so deep it swallowed everything she loved. She staggered out, the diner spinning, her burns forgotten, her mind a war room because surrender meant death. Fighting meant loss, and Hayes knew it. His trap perfect, her victory flipped to nightmare. The protests useless now, the feds too. Slow, and she clutched the USB, her only weapon. Because this wasn't just war, it was slaughter, racial vengeance dialed to madness, and she'd answer, not with tears but blood, because Evelyn raised her to fight. And fight she would, even if it tore her soul apart. Comment number 1 if Hayes' evils got you shaking. Hit like if Aisha's guts keep you locked in. And subscribe because this showdown's about to explode. She ran into the night. Her mother's face burned in her mind. But can a soldier save her kin from a madman's rope? Or will Hayes' next twist snap her for good? Aisha Langston sprinted through the muggy Mississippi night, her blistered feet pounding dirt roads 20 miles north of Jackson Hollow, her lungs raw from smoke and fury, the stolen hoodie clinging to her burned skin as she raced toward the derelict warehouse where Roland Hayes held her mother. Evelyn hostage, the live stream's grainy image seared in her mind, Evelyn's grey hair wild, a noose loose around her neck, Hayes' masked face snarling. Surrender or she dies. A racial death threat broadcast to millions. Her mother's. Life the bait to crush her, and Aisha's every step was a vow not to fold but to fight, because 22 years in the army taught her one rule: you don't negotiate with monsters, you destroy them. She'd called in old favors after bolting from the diner, her voice a rasp over a payphone, dialing 2 ex-soldiers from her Kabul unit, Rico Valdez, a wiry medic with a scar across his cheek, and Tanya Brooks, a sniper with eyes like flint. Both in Memphis, both ready. "We're with you, Colonel." Their tones steel, and they'd met her at a truck stop, armed with pistols, a rifle and a med kit. No questions, just nods, because Evelyn was family to them too, and Hayes' hate wouldn't win, not tonight. They scouted the warehouse by 2 in the morning, a crumbling shell off a gravel lane, its windows shattered, rusted beams jutting like bones, the faint hum of a generator buzzing inside, and Aisha crouched in the weeds, her leg throbbing, her burns pulsing, but her focus laser-tight because the livestream showed Evelyn tied to a chair, Hayes pacing, a shotgun in his grip, his crew of 3 thugs lounging, their laughter a taunt, racial venom in every cackle, and she whispered to Rico, "Front breach, I'll flank." Her plan sharp, military precise because this was war, not a plea. Tanya took position 50 yards out, her rifle scope glinting as she lined up shots. Rico at the door with a crowbar, and Aisha circled right, slipping through a jagged hole in the wall, her boots silent on damp concrete, the air thick with mold. And gasoline, her heart hammering as she spotted Evelyn, her mother's eyes fierce despite the rope, a soldier's daughter unbowed, and Aisha signaled, a quick fist, go time. Rico smashed the door, splinters flying, Tanya's first shot cracking a thug's knee, blood spraying as he howled, and Aisha charged, tackling another, her elbow smashing his nose, cartilage crunching, her burns screaming but ignored, because Evelyn was 10 feet away, alive, and that's what mattered. Hayes spun, shotgun blasting, buckshot chewing the wall near Rico, who ducked, firing back, his pistol barking, clipping Hayes's arm, red blooming on his flannel, and the third thug bolted, cowardice trumping pay, leaving Hayes wounded, snarling, "Oh, you're dead, all of you." But Aisha cut Evelyn's ropes, her mother's wrists raw, her voice steady. "Get me out, girl." And they ran, Rico covering, Tanya's rifle popping outside, a firefight blazing as they dragged Evelyn to the jeep, her frail frame trembling but firm, freedom seconds away. They piled in, tires spinning gravel, Hayes staggering out, blood dripping, his shotgun raised, but Rico floored it, the warehouse shrinking in the dust, and Aisha hugged Evelyn. "You're safe, Mama," her chest heaving. Because they'd done it. Beaten him, saved her. And by dawn they hit a safe house 50 miles south, a fishing shack on stilts over a swamp, moss dripping from cypress trees, the radio blaring, hostage freed, cop cornered, feds swarming. Jackson Hollow, Hayes arrested in a sting, his arm bandaged, his sneer gone, headlines screaming justice, and Aisha sank onto a cot, her team alive, her mother sipping water, victory tasting real, because he was cuffed, done, or so she believed, because Hayes's hate ran deeper than bars. He sat in a precinct cell, his arm throbbing, his buzzed head bowed, but his brother, Sheriff Lyle Hayes, a hulking man with a grey mustache and a colder heart, watched from the hall, his badge glinting, his voice a growl. "You ain't done, Roland," because family was blood, and blood was war, racial war, and Lyle had pull, deputies in his pocket, a plan already spinning. By noon, they faked Roland's death, a staged overdose. Suspect succumbed to injuries. The report read, Lyle slipping him out a back door, a body double in the morgue, and Roland grinned, free, feral, because Aisha's win was his spark, not his end, and he'd hit her harder, obliterate her hope. That night, they bombed her safe house. A thunderous blast at 3 in the morning, dynamite shattering the shack, flames swallowing the swamp, Rico and Tanya screaming as shrapnel tore them apart, their bodies sinking in the murk, Evelyn staggering out, her leg gashed, Aisha diving to shield her. Wood raining, her ears ringing, her team gone, blood pooling under her nails as she crawled, alive but broken, because Hayes wasn't in jail, wasn't dead. He was this, a racial reaper, and the radio crackled static, no news, no rescue, just silence because Lyle's cover held, the feds fooled, and Aisha lay in the mud, Evelyn coughing beside her, her victory a lie, her friends ash, because Hayes's counterstrike wasn't defeat, it was annihilation. Racial hate his bomb, and she clutched her mother, her burns searing, her mind a furnace because this wasn't over. It was hell, and hell she'd fight, because Hayes thought her dead, thought her done. But she'd rise, a ghost to haunt him, because soldiers don't die easy, they avenge, and avenge she would even if it took her last drop. Aisha Langston crawled through the swamp's black mud, her arms trembling as she dragged her mother, Evelyn, from the smouldering wreckage of the safe house, the air thick with the stench of burnt wood and flesh, her ears still ringing from the dynamite blast that tore Rico and Tanya apart, their screams silenced in the night, shrapnel glinting in the muck where her team once stood, her burns weeping pus under the shredded hoodie, her leg a throbbing mess but her will iron, because Hayes's bomb didn't kill her, didn't kill Evelyn, and that was his mistake, a crack she'd widen into his grave, because racial hate had taken everything, her truck, her home, her friends, and she'd make him pay with every breath left in her battered body. Evelyn coughed, her grey hair matted with blood from a gash on her shin, her voice a rasp, "Keep moving, girl." And Aisha obeyed, hauling her mother through reeds, the swamp's water cold and slimy around their waists, mosquitoes buzzing. As dawn crept grey over the cypress trees, her mind racing because Roland Hayes wasn't in custody, wasn't dead. His brother Lyle's fake-out had freed him, and this bombing, this slaughter, was their racial war dialed to genocide. But she'd survived worse. Sandstorms and snipers, and she'd survived this because surrender wasn't her blood. They staggered 2 miles, collapsing on a muddy bank, Evelyn's pulse faint but steady, and Aisha tore her sleeve, binding the gash, her hands steady despite the shakes, because her mother was alive, her anchor, and she'd get her out. Get them both out. So she flagged a fisherman, an old man in a john boat, his eyes wide at their state. Hospital now, her voice a command, and he nodded, no questions, motoring them 10 miles to a county ER. Its neon sign flickering as medics rushed out, wheeling Evelyn in. "She'll make it," one said, and Aisha sank against a wall, her body screaming, her hoodie soaked with swamp and blood because she'd won this much, kept her mother breathing. But Hayes was loose, a phantom with dynamite, and she needed more than survival. She needed fight. Feds swarmed the hospital by noon, drawn by the blast, their suits crisp, their badges glinting. A woman named Agent Kessler taking charge, her short hair streaked grey, her voice clipped. "Colonel Langston, we've got your leaks, the texts, the dashcam. Hayes is a ghost, but we're on it." And Aisha handed over the USB from the precinct hack, her voice hoarse. "He bombed us, killed my team, he's free." Her words a spark, because Kessler's eyes hardened. "We'll nail him." And they whisked her to a safe room, IVs. Dripping into her arm, her burns bandaged, Evelyn stable down the hall. And by dusk the news erupted, CNN looping the story, colonel survives cops bombing, sheriff implicated, protests swelling in 50 cities, Congress howling for reform, the texts replaying Hayes's orders. Torch the center, plant the ID. His racial hate a national wound, and Aisha watched from a hospital bed, her chest tight, because this was her strike paying off. Hayes a fugitive, Lyle indicted, her name a rallying cry, justice inching. Close, or so she thought, because the swamp's mud hid a deeper rot. She slept fitfully, the IV beeping, her leg propped. Evelyn's snores a faint comfort through the wall, and Kessler sat guard, her laptop glowing. "We're raiding Lyle's office tomorrow," her tone sure, because the feds had momentum. The country watching, Hayes's empire crumbling, and Aisha nodded. "Good," her voice faint, because this was it. The win, the end. Her team's blood a price for this spotlight, and she closed her eyes, relief creeping in. A hero's mantle, settling, but the hospital's quiet masked a snake. Because Hayes's reach wasn't broken, it was coiled. At 3 in the morning, Kessler stepped out. Coffee run, her boots clicking down the hall, and a new agent slipped in. A lean man with a buzz cut and a thin smile, his badge reading Agent Pratt, his eyes too sharp, too familiar, and Aisha tensed, her soldier's gut twitching because something was off. His stance too casual, his hand too close to his coat. But exhaustion dulled her, the IV's drip lulling her, and he leaned over, adjusting the tube. "Rest easy, Colonel." His voice silk, and she drifted, trusting, because feds were her shield now, right? Wrong, because Pratt wasn't Kessler's man, he was Hayes's. An academy pal from 20 years back, planted deep, and he slipped cyanide into the IV, a clear drop sliding down, whispering, "This town's ours," as her pulse spiked, her vision blurring, her body seizing, foam bubbling at her lips, and Evelyn screamed from the next room, "Aisha, no!" Her frail fists banging the wall, because Pratt wasn't just a fed, he was the ultimate betrayal, racial hate in a suit, Hayes's. Final blow, and Aisha flatlined, the monitor wailing, her mother sobbing. Medics rushing in too late, because this wasn't justice, it was murder. Systemic racism's knife in her back, and Hayes laughed from his hideout, Lyle at his side, because the spotlight didn't save. Her it lit her grave, and he'd won, turned her fight to dust, her team's sacrifice to mockery because his network wasn't crumbling. It was killing, and Aisha's last breath was his trophy. Or so he thought, because death wasn't her end. It was her pivot, and Jackson Hollow's reckoning was coming, not in headlines but shadows, because soldiers don't just die, they haunt, and haunt she would, even from the mud. Aisha Langston's heart flatlined in the Jackson Hollow Hospital, The monitor's wail piercing the sterile air as Agent Pratt slipped out, his cyanide trick a silent kill, her body limp under the sheet, foam drying on her lips. Evelyn's sobs, echoing from the next room, a mother's grief raw and jagged. Because Roland Hayes' racial hate had won, his Academy pal's poison snuffing her fight, her burns, her bruises, her 22 years of service buried under a federal traitor's. Smirk and medics rushed in, their shouts frantic. Code Blue, she's gone. But the chaos hid a spark, because two nurses, ex-army medics from her old unit, saw the IV's odd tint, smelled the bitter almond whiff, and moved fast. No questions, no panic, just instinct, slamming the crash cart aside, slipping adrenaline. Into her vein, their hands steady, their whispers urgent. Come on, Colonel, not today. And her pulse flickered, weak, secret, a ghost waking under their care because Hayes thought her dead. Pratt thought her gone. But soldiers don't die easy. They adapt. And these women, loyal to her stripes, faked it, draping the sheet, wheeling her to a basement morgue, a body double swapped in. A Jane Doe from a car wreck while Aisha breathed shallow, hidden, because this wasn't defeat. It was rebirth. Racial war's next round. They smuggled her out at dawn. A gurney rolled through service tunnels, her burns wrapped fresh, her legs splintered, Evelyn at her side, her mother's eyes red but fierce. You're alive, that's enough. And they hit an underground safe house, a storm cellar 10 miles south, concrete walls damp with earth. A cot and a radio there whirled, because the feds bought the death, CNN blared. Colonel assassinated, cops conspiracy deepens, protests raging, Congress howling, Lyle indicted, Hayes a phantom, and Aisha trained, push-ups on cracked ribs, squats on a busted leg, her team gone but her spirit steel because Rico and Tanya's blood, Jamal's ash. They demanded more than tears. They demanded war, and she'd wage it, quiet, cold, from the grave. Weeks bled by, her strength creeping back, Evelyn stitching her jeans, their bond a lifeline, and Aisha pieced a plan, her mind a battlefield, because Hayes' texts, the dash cam, they'd hurt him, but not enough. His network still thrived. Pratt free, Lyle pulling strings so she rallied survivors, Leon the barber, a nurse from the church, 5 others from the rally. A ragtag squad trained in the cellar, knives sharpened, fists hardened, because this wasn't protest, it was ambush. Racial hate her target, Hayes her prey, and she'd strike where he slept, because the dead don't warn, they haunt. At 3 weeks intel hit, a whisper from a precinct mole, Hayes holed up in a safe house off Route 6. A brick bunker with steel doors. His crew shrunk to 4, Lyle with him, their arrogance ripe, because they thought her corpse cooled, thought, Jackson Hollow theirs, and Aisha moved midnight, her squad in black, her burn scars now, her limp masked by will, Evelyn left behind. Stay safe, Mama. A promise she'd keep because this was it, the kill shot, and they hit the bunker, silent as shadows, Leon cutting power, sparks spitting, Tanya's ghost in her aim, as she tossed a smoke grenade, glass shattering, chaos blooming. And they stormed, knives flashing, a thug's throat slit, blood pooling. Hayes bolting up, his buzzed head gleaming. What the hell, his shotgun barking, but she dodged, smoke her shield, tackling him, her knee in his gut, his arm twisting. Bone snapping, and Lyle lunged, a pistol cracking, grazing her shoulder, red blooming. But Leon tackled him, a brick to his skull, and they cuffed Hayes, Lyle groaning, the crew dead or down, victory sharp, sudden, sweet. Cameras rolled, a news chopper circling. WJXN live as Aisha dragged Hayes out, his face bruised, his flannel torn. I'm alive. He's done. Her voice a blade, the feed blasting nationwide, protests erupting anew, feds storming in. Lyle, cuffed, Pratt's name spilling, because this was her rising, racial hate's titan felled, her squad cheering. Leon's fist high and she stood, blood dripping, a ghost made flesh because Hayes' empire wasn't crumbling. It was ash, or so she thought, because he grinned, teeth red. You're too late. His whisper a snake, and she froze, his eyes glinting because he'd rigged something. A final play, and sirens wailed closer, choppers thumping. But his laugh grew, chilling her spine because this wasn't over. It was trap. Racial vengeance, his last card. And he spat. Water, supply toxins, thousands dead. His plan, a genocide bomb, Jackson Hollow's veins poisoned, a cleanse he'd dreamed. And he'd triggered it hours ago, laughing as they dragged him off, because this wasn't defeat. It was checkmate flipped, and Aisha's victory soured, her mind racing, because the town, the kids, the rally folks, they were minutes from doom. And she bolted, her shoulder bleeding, her squad scrambling. Because Hayes wasn't cornered, he was killing, racial hate his legacy, and she'd stopped him too late, or had she, because the radio crackled. Feds shouting, "Water plant now!" And she ran, her burns forgotten, her mother's voice in her head, "Fight, girl." Because this wasn't triumph, it was race, and she'd win it, or die trying, because Hayes thought her dead once, thought her done, but ghosts don't just haunt, they hunt and hunt she would to the last tick. Aisha Langston sprinted through the pre-dawn gloom of Jackson Hollow, her boots pounding wet pavement, her shoulder leaking blood from Lyle's grazing shot, her burned skin screaming under the stolen hoodie as she raced toward the water treatment plant 5 miles north, the Fed's radio crackling in her ear. Toxin confirmed, cyanide drums, minutes left. Hayes's final racial genocide ticking down, his laugh still echoing from the bunker. Thousands dead, a hate so deep it poisoned a town, and she pushed harder, her leg buckling but holding, because Jamal's ash, Tyrone's coma, Rico and Tanya's blood, they drove her, not as ghosts but as fire, because this wasn't just her fight, it was theirs. Every black soul Hayes had crushed, and she'd stop him even if it shredded her last sinew. Her squad trailed, Leon panting, the nurse clutching a knife, feds screeching behind in SUVs, their lights strobing the misty streets. But she outran them, her army endurance kicking in, 22 years of drills burning through exhaustion. Because Hayes's plan wasn't chaos, it was extermination. A cleanse he'd bragged about, and the plant loomed ahead. A squat concrete fortress ringed by chain link, its pipes humming, water pumping to 30,000 homes, kids sipping. Breakfast, grandmothers brewing tea, all seconds from death if she failed. She vaulted the fence, wire snagging her jeans, tearing flesh, and landed hard. Her breath a rasp as she scanned. The main valve room 50 yards off, its door ajar, a shadow moving inside. Hayes's last thug, a wiry man with a shaved head, his hands on a lever. Cyanide drums stacked, their seals cracked, poison dripping into the flow, and she charged. No gun, no time, just fists slamming into him, her elbow cracking his jaw, blood spraying as he swung a wrench, clipping her ribs. Pain exploding, but she twisted, kicked his knee, bones snapping, and he fell howling, the lever untouched. Seconds spared. She staggered to the drums, her vision swimming, her shoulder pulsing red, and yanked the emergency shutoff, valves clanging shut, water stalling, the drip halting, her hands slick with sweat and blood as she ripped hoses free, poison pooling on concrete, not in pipes, not in throats, and she collapsed, chest heaving, the feds bursting in. Clear, clear. Their shouts distant as helicopters thumped overhead, rotors slicing fog, because she'd done it, stopped it. Hayes's hate diffused with 10 ticks left, a town alive. Her body broken but breathing, and she laughed. A jagged sound because he'd lost, his racial war snuffed, or so it seemed, because the plant's hum hid a deeper shift. Feds swarmed, cuffing the thug, sealing the drums, Kessler barking orders, "Get her out, medic." And they hauled her up, her leg dragging, her hoodie soaked, but her eyes locked on a cell TV in a guard shack, Hayes in custody, his face bruised, his flannel torn, watching her triumph, his sneer gone, replaced by something hollow because his toxin failed, his empire ash, and she'd risen, a ghost he couldn't kill, her squad circling her, Leon's hand on her back. "You're a damn legend, Colonel," his voice thick, because Jackson, Hollow breathed, the kids safe, the water clean, and she nodded. Her burns a badge, her blood a seal, because this was justice, hard won, brutal, real. But her chest tightened, not with pride but weariness, because fighting Hayes, fighting hate, it hollowed her, every win a scar, and she'd given enough, too much, maybe all. They patched her in an ambulance, IVs dripping. Evelyn wheeled beside her, her mother's gash stitched, her grey eyes fierce. "You saved us, girl." And Aisha gripped her hand. "Not alone, Mama." Because this wasn't her end. It was her pivot, a shift she'd felt brewing since the hospital, since Pratt's poison. Because heroes burn out, and she was cinders, ready to pass the torch. Because Hayes wasn't the root, he was a branch, and the tree of racial hate stood tall, needing more than her fists to fell. She quit that day, no fanfare, no speech, just a whisper to Kessler. "I'm out," handing over the USB, the texts, the dash cam, a war chest of proof, and Kessler frowned. "You're the face of this." But Aisha shook her head. Not anymore, because the spotlight blinded, the fight drained, and she'd won the battle, not the war. So she turned to Evelyn. "Take it, Mama." Her voice soft, and Evelyn straightened, her frail frame steeling, because the twist wasn't Aisha's stand, it was her mother's rise. A retired CIA operative, 20 years undercover, her nurse gig a cover, her silence a weapon, and Aisha saw it now, the files Evelyn kept, the contacts she'd called. "I trained you, girl, but I'm not done." Her mother's voice a blade, because Evelyn had watched Hayes' network, tracked his roots, and now she'd cut them, deep, quiet, lethal. Evelyn took the evidence, her hands steady, and vanished that night, no goodbye, just a note. "Finish it my way." And Aisha stayed back, her burns healing, her leg mending, as Evelyn moved, a shadow dismantling Hayes' cabal, not with protests, but precision. Sheriffs disappearing, deputies flipping. Pratt found dead in a ditch, his throat slit, no trace. Because Evelyn wasn't loud, she was surgical, racial hate's silent reaper. And by week's end, Hayes hanged himself in his cell, a noose of his own belt, his eyes wide, his last note scrawled, "She's everywhere," because Evelyn wasn't just Aisha's mother. She was his nightmare, a ghost he couldn't outrun. And Aisha smiled, faint, bitter, because her fight birthed this, her pain forged this. But she was done. Her war passed on. She left Jackson Hollow a month later. No trace, no trail. A duffel slung over her shoulder, her burned scars now, her limp slight, boarding a bus to nowhere, her mother's work a hum in the distance, because Evelyn's CIA web took down a statewide network. 30 arrests. A racist ring shattered. And Aisha recorded a message, dropped it online. "I broke their shield. You break their world." Her voice low, final. A call not to her, but to them. The kids at the center, the rally crowd, Leon, just because she'd lit the fuse, Evelyn sparked it and they'd finish it. Racial hate's end, not hers to wield, but theirs to claim. She vanished, a ghost fading into dusk. Her legacy not medals but momentum, because Hayes thought her dead, thought her done. But she'd flipped it, handed it off, and Evelyn's quiet wrath was the shock, the reversal, a mother's vengeance, outstripping a soldier's stand. And Jackson Hollow shifted, not healed but cracked open, because hate didn't die easy. But neither did hope, and Aisha's last gift was that crack, wide enough for others to climb through, because soldiers don't just fight, they seed, and seed she had, even as she walked away, her mother's shadow the storm, her exit the dawn. This gripping tale of Aisha Langston and Roland Hayes reveals raw truths about resilience, systemic racism, and the cost of justice. First, it shows that courage isn't loud, it's relentless. Aisha fought not with fanfare but with grit, facing racial hate that burned her home, killed her friends, and nearly took her mother. Yet she stood, proving one soul can defy a storm. Second, power unchecked breeds monsters. Hayes' badge wasn't protection, it was a weapon, wielded by a man whose racism festered in a system that shielded him, until Aisha's evidence and Evelyn's shadow tore it down, a reminder that silence enables tyranny. Third, victory isn't always triumph, it's survival. Aisha stopped Hayes' genocide, but lost pieces of herself, her team, her peace, passing the fight to Evelyn, showing justice often demands sacrifice, not celebration. Fourth, roots run deeper than battles. Evelyn's quiet CIA past flipped the tale, a mother's strength outlasting a soldier's stand, proving family can be the fiercest force against hate. Finally, change isn't one hero's burden. Aisha seeded it, Evelyn sparked it, but the town had to carry it. A lesson that real progress takes a collective will. This story isn't just a clash, it's a mirror, reflecting the ugly scars of racism and the quiet power of those who resist. So what's your take? How do you fight when the system's rigged against you? Comment below, hit like if this moved. You subscribe for more truths, and share to spread the fire, because stories like this don't just end, They ignite. Thanks for joining this journey. May you find strength to face your own battles and wisdom to lift others along the way.